Fabrice, thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me.
So just to kick things off, let's just get straight into this, man. Like, we've got a few mutual friends, and I've heard about your businesses, and I actually checked last night my inbox. I first connected with you in 2010, believe it or not, on LinkedIn. And so I've been following you from afar for some time. And then over the years, I've had friends who've had their companies invested in by you and FJ Labs, and I've just been following you. Been really fascinated by how much you've been doing. So today we're going to go into the full story. But before we even get into that, I'd love to kind of paint a picture of a few years back. There was this great New York Times article about you, where you were living on it looks like a 20-acre estate, I think upstate New York or somewhere nice like that. You had a butler, you had a fancy car, all the things that you'd expect of a traditional tech entrepreneur who's made a lot of money. But you ended up selling it all and going all the way down to 50 possessions and traveling the world. So I'd love to just paint a picture of like what happened in that moment that you kind of went through that reverse midlife crisis, as I've heard it called.
Well, as entrepreneurs, we iterate and we try a lot of things in our professional lives. I mean, we test what business model we're going to use. We test the site design. If a button is orange, red, green, does it say sell or sell for free, etc. And I felt that people were not, and I was not, iterating enough on my personal life. And every few years, I do these diagnoses of where do I stand professionally, personally, what are the things that are not as optimal as they had been in the past, and where I try to think through from a reasonably introspective way, what could I do better? And one of the fundamental analyses that as we were all getting somewhat older, my friendships felt like, not that they were fraying per se, but they're becoming more shallow than they were before. Because when I was 21 or 22 working at McKinsey, my friends were there working with me essentially, and we were seeing each other 7 days a week and hanging out and remaking the world or in college. And as we all got busy and married or had kids, we were seeing each other every other month. And all of a sudden, this became, when we see each other, it's a biographical update, and no longer had like the depth and the perspective that it had. And I felt that in my setup, where I was in the city during the week in my beautiful like penthouse apartment, I was in Bedford on weekends, and even though it was like an amazing setup, like there was a paintball field in the garden, a remote control car racetrack in the garden, and paddle and a pool, and I would managed to get people there. It was usually, my younger colleagues and employees or friends, not really my true friends. And it was still hard to get people there. And then the things you have like take time away from you. And I'm like, one of the ways to solve for this is actually go down, become asset light, because the things you own end up owning you, and really spend time thinking, now that I don't have a default place to go to, where do I really want to be? Who do I want to spend time with? And so I gave most of my non-financial material possessions to charity. The rest of my friends gave essentially everything away, went down to 50 items, and started iterating. Now, my first plan or attempt was, let's go couch surfing in my friends' couches. And that was an utter and total disaster and failure because, as Benjamin Franklin once said, fish like house guests start smelling after 3 days. And the issue was embedding myself in their lives where their lives had not really changed, and they still had all their obligations with school and schoolwork and work per se. Didn't lead to what I envisioned, which was, we go home and we remake the world around a glass of wine all night long, and we rekindle this extraordinary friendship. And so that failed, but I kept at it and kept iterating until I found a model that worked. And frankly, I never liked possessions per se. I don't have a watch, etc. I just liked.
You don't? You're saying, or you do?
Oh no, I don't.
You don't? Okay.
No, but I like the experiences they provided. Like I actually like. I'm really 12 or 15, and so I actually like racing road control cars and playing paintball and playing tennis, and I loved having a movie theater and a video game room and a PC gaming room and like ping pong and foosball and air hockey. All those things I loved having. It just didn't like the burden of having them, and so trying to find a way to have all these fun adventures easily without owning them has been what I've been striving for.
Yeah. So where have you landed now? I mean, because that was, what year was this? Was it 2015 or 13?
So the New York Times article was in 2015, 3 years after I'd done it. I did it in late 2012, and it was in conjunction with actually leaving OLX, where I'd been CEO, and I'd been grappling with this idea or this concept because I was CEO of a super successful company, like 350 million unique users a month.
Yeah.
5,000 employees, leading classified site in all these countries. And it was it's amazingly powerful and gratifying. I mean, when you have 350 million users, everything you try is statistically significant. So it's a platform. And because we're doing a really good job, our users loved us. I mean, millions of people were making a living off the site. Every day we're getting thousands of love letters from users telling us to what extent we were changing people's lives. And people in these countries really looked up to me as a role model. In these countries, meaning Nigeria, Kenya, Mozambique, India, Pakistan, Russia, Brazil. I mean, all the emerging markets, we were a force for good. We were a safe, free place for people to transact, to find jobs, and basically everything Craigslist should have been. Had they had a modern mobile interface and application, and they were spam-free, murder-free, prostitution-free, personals-free, catering to women who are ultimately the primary decision makers in all household decisions. And so I built this wonderful site, and I'd loved the experience there. But along the way, we faced a lot of competition, and I had to raise hundreds of millions of dollars, and when one of these aggressively publicly funded, publicly traded competitor came in, when in 2010 I went to American VCs and said, look, I need like a couple $100 million to go spend on TV in Pakistan. Didn't quite go over as well as I'd expected. And so I ended up selling the company to a publicly traded South African company called Naspers. And actually, it was the right move. They gave us like $1 billion in capital. We spent it on TV in these emerging markets, and it was actually totally the right play. We won. We ultimately merged with our biggest competitor in our favor, won the war, consolidated the assets, and did really well. And the company became extraordinarily profitable. I mean, today it's like hundreds of millions of revenues, 75% EBITDA margin in our top countries, and the company is really, really crushing it. But now that I was part, and I stayed there for 3 years post-acquisition, that I was part of this larger group, even though it was extremely gratifying from, I've built this amazing thing, the position is really well regarded and it's well compensated, it didn't feel fun anymore. Like my job became, I need to create this annual budget that and then we need to hit because we're part of a publicly traded company, we need to hit the quarterly numbers, we need to hit the updates to the quarterly numbers. And
very different from going from 0 to 1.
It was so different, and I see the appeal. Because I'm crazy. When I was young, I wanted to be CEO of a publicly traded company, but I can see the appeal of saying private kind of forever if you can. And so I'm like, maybe I should actually give it all up. And so I went through this iterative process of like thinking through, do I leave this? And if I do, what do I do instead of that? And while I'm at this, let's also revisit, whether or not there are things I should change in my personal life. And so going from the underlying malaise that I had in my professional life, where I wasn't super happy with the job on a daily basis, even though legitimately I had no reason to complain. I mean, it was on top of the world. I figured, let's do a pretty radical change, and then let's go try and see where it leads.
Yeah, and I love this on your blog. You've got a great blog with lots of long-form content. We were just talking about how people are asking you to start a podcast. So we should talk about that after. But there's this great, I think it's a 3-part series so far, and there's going to be a 4th one about decision-making. And what I love, and maybe we'll go into the details of that a little bit later in the second half of the show. But what I love is you essentially send yourself emails, and you write it as if you're almost sending it to a friend that happens to be yourself. And I was like reading it last night. I was like, I need to do this because I feel like I do something similar. Like every year since I was like 16, I've been writing out, things I want to focus on in the year, things I'm happy with, things I'm not happy with, and not necessarily New Year's resolutions, but just a way to reflect on what's going on. And but the way you wrote in the email was pretty funny because we send 100 emails a day. We're so used to doing it. And when you're forced to kind of send it like you're sending to a friend, it's just this other concept of treating yourself like you would treat your friend. and often we don't often treat ourselves as well as we would treat friends. So maybe we'll jump into that a little bit later as well. And then just since we're on this topic of the acres of land and all that sort of stuff, you also went island shopping at one point. When I read that, I was like, there's not many people I meet that have gone island shopping, so I want to ask about it. So tell me where did that place me in where that was in the grand scheme of your whole journey? Like, what made you think I want to go buy an island?
Well, island shopping was not really, let's go buy an island. It was more, let's find an island that could actually be a secondary residence where I could create a hybrid lifestyle. So I was thinking through, how do I optimize for quality of life and work-life balance? And I didn't love the Bedford experience because every 3 days I'm driving an hour and a half or 2 hours to go from one point to the other, which is an inherent transaction cost. At the same time, it was hard to get people there, and so it's socially isolating. And I'm like, maybe the correct mechanism or setup there was I spent a month in New York, and it's completely intense at every level, socially, artistically, intellectually, professionally.
Yeah.
And there's back-to-back in-person meetings. We go to like art gallery openings or theater. I hang out with friends. I organize intellectual salons, which is one of my favorite things to do. I organize
Say that
with
again.
friends.
You organize intellectual salons.
Yes.
What does that mean?
So I invite 8 to 12 people that are really, really smart. And we're having dinner. There's only one conversation allowed at a time. There's typically a pre-assigned topic. So you cannot talk to your neighbor. Because we want the collective minds of the people at the table to talk about this topic, whatever the topic may be. And I'll give a few examples of topics afterwards. And there's no real perspective. It's a bit of intellectual masturbation, but it's really, can we get closer to the truth? But I also use same format, but different topics. So topics can be religion in 2100, the ethics and morality of torture, life in a post-singularity world, how to deal with the refugee crisis. Or I have more open format questions or topics like, we call them dialoguing sessions, where everyone needs to come and talk for 3 to 5 minutes about something interesting that's been on their mind. Then the rest of the group collectively discusses that topic with that person for like 3 to 5 minutes, and then we move on to the next person. And then if there's 10 of us, that's 10 minutes per person. So that's like a couple hours over dinner. And it's wonderful because we don't spend enough time being reflective and thinking.
Yeah.
And a city like New York actually offers so many brilliant, amazing people that actually are happy to engage in these, that it's one of the reasons to be here.
Yeah.
But then after I've kind of burned the candles by both ends in New York, socially and professionally, I think going to a place like the Caribbean that's in the same time zone where I'm actually working during the day, and the beauty of my life and my work is email and Zoom and Skype.
Yeah.
I take my 8 to 12 calls a day. I do my couple hundred emails, but then I'm at a place where there's literally nothing to do, and I can actually be healthy by playing tennis or kite surfing. But then in the evenings, it's time off to reflect, and so I read, and every year I read 100 books or so.
Yeah.
I write, and that's when I write my blog post. So this last blog post that you saw that I published, which is 5,200 words, I wrote while I was in Cabarete in the Dominican Republic in Turks and Caicos. And I tried to take a step back, and it actually fit well in my new life setup because it became a place during that month off where I can bring friends and colleagues. I can bring friends and family in larger groups or smaller groups to reconnect with them. And I can also choose to be alone in these more self-reflective moments. And I've even iterated in like, how often should I be there? A week, every other month, et cetera. And the final model was a month on, a month off. And that seems to work
That's what
well.
you've landed right now.
Yeah, well, I also add, of course, like going skiing for a week, like taking 5 weeks of real vacation elsewhere. It's something that is at some places that are not these, 2 weeks of which are in skiing, typically in heli skiing in British Columbia, and then a few weeks around the world, often like just doing survival in the rainforest, like in Guyana or things like that.
Sounds great. Sounds like a good life, man.
It's a great life. It's really fun.
I'm trying to think as someone who's listening to this right now. I've already done a bunch of research and read about you for hours. Someone listening to this is probably thinking, that sounds great and super cool, and it's kind of nice to hear that side of someone's life. but they're probably thinking like, how did you even get in that position to be able to, have the space to be able to go island shopping or have this 20-acre estate. So it would be good for us just to kind of summarize your background. You were named by Forbes as the #1 angel investor of 2018. And the way they measured that, I think, was number of investments and number of exits, I believe. So, on that list is, great people like Alexis Ohanian, founder of Reddit, and Naval Ravikant, who's the founder of AngelList, and Gary Vaynerchuk, who's been on this show and does a bunch of angel investing. So, lots of people that someone listening to this have heard of. But before you even got into the investing world, you were an entrepreneur. As you mentioned, you basically set up the Craigslist of the rest of the world. And you also, sounds like you started a ringtone company before that, and like an auction site, kind of like eBay in Europe as well. From your side, did I miss anything out there? Or was there something that you'd like to add as well?
Yeah, I mean, look, I see myself as an entrepreneur even today. I never intended to be neither a venture capitalist nor an angel investor. It's just so happened that when you're a consumer-facing internet CEO, a lot of other entrepreneurs come and ask for advice and money. And so because I'm especially a specialist in marketplaces, I started saying, okay, I don't really have time to evaluate all of these, but I only invest in things that I understand somewhat inherently. So I started investing essentially when I started running companies. And so by 2012 or 2013, when I left OLX, I already had over 100 angel investments. And the funny thing was most people already saw me as an angel investor, even though if you looked at my time, I was CEO of a multi-thousand employee company with hundreds of millions of users. But the thing is, in the press, my name would show up with all the companies I invested in, and then only once in a while the company I was running. Especially here, given that my company was neither big in the U.S. or in Western Europe, or frankly any of the developed markets, and so that was really funny. And but in 2013, when I continued on that journey and figured, okay, what do I do next? I realized I like building companies, I like starting companies, and I like investing in companies. And so let's create a structure that allows me to do both things. And I've continued to do that. But even to this day, every year or so, I start a new company that I become co-founder, executive chairman of, sometimes I actually become CEO of. And
that's incubated within FJ Labs,
correct.
Right? So that's within your... Would you call yourselves an accelerator? How do you define yourself?
The definitions, accelerators, startup studio, incubators, vary, because these days Y Combinator calls themselves an incubator. I would have called them an accelerator. But I think the proper definition for us is startup studio, because we build a company de novo. Like, we come up with the idea. We find the co-founders, we build it with them. My partner, Jose, or I become executive chairman and co-founders, and we put in the first, usually 2.75 million, and we're off to the races. And we do one of those a year.
Great. And just to give people a sense of scale, so you've had, I think, 400 investments, right? Is that about right?
No, we're almost at 500 investments right
now.
We ended, so in 2018 alone, we made 128 investments. 97 first-time investments. Yeah, we're crazy. 20 and 31 follow-ons, which brought us to a total of 475 investments. And we did 169 exits or so, and realized exits. And on those, we made money in about half. But overall, including the ones that were zeros, we had a 4.4x average multiple and a 60% net IRR, which is top 0.1%. If
just
you look
for
at
people
it
who are listening who don't know what IRR is, just could you explain really quickly what it is?
It's internal rate of return. So if you gave me $1 at the end of the year, it would be worth $1.60, and by the year after that, the $1.60 itself would compound by 60%. So it'd be worth like $2.80, and so on and so forth. And that's been compounding since 1998. So when I first started doing this, and now of course the sums originally were really, really small, but it seems to be continuing to go on and do well today.
Great. And then just the last point on this before we go into your story really is just to give a sense of some of the companies you've invested in. So I saw on your website, I think some of these were later stage as well, but ones that people have heard of like Uber and Airbnb and Alibaba and Viagogo. But then there's a bunch of others as well, Lending Club, Fanduel, Palantir, Dropbox, Instacart. Like, these are all massive names. Is there like a few that you're most proud of that you've had so many investments that you were like, oh, I actually saw that before someone else, or I really love the mission? I'm sure you love all of them in their own ways. But is there one that came to mind as I said that?
My process is a little bit different, I suppose, for most angel investors or VCs. It's not like I fall in love. I have a very specific process for evaluating companies where I have 4 selection criteria, and if they meet 3 of the 4 collectively, then and the other one is more optional, then I invest. And so so they need to fit in my framework at that point in time. But like, and obviously always love the founders and love the businesses, and I think the deal terms are fair. Otherwise, I wouldn't be doing the deals. And ex post, I can always tell you the ones that were the most successful. But like, did I see it before anyone else, etc. Well, frankly, given my approach where I'm not leading and I'm not pricing, I'm always joining someone else, and it's never really truly the case. But like, I think we invested in Delivery Hero, which is like the seamless grub hub of Europe, at like a 2 million valuation, pre-money valuation at the very beginning, and today it's publicly traded. I think is worth like 8 billion.
Yeah, wow.
And so there are a lot of those where we can be very proud of the decisions made and the analysis. But given the number of at bats we've had, there are also a lot of failures and also a lot of misses, like things we should or could have invested in that we didn't.
Yeah, I saw that you missed Uber at a $2 billion valuation.
Yeah, and I wrote a debrief post the conversation. I'm like, I'm going to regret this for the rest of my life. Like so, and I guess when you start a debrief, like writing something like that, it probably means you're making a mistake. You should actually invest. But I looked at the numbers, and it's just things were so frothy, right? Like the company was doing about 100 million in GMV per month. And the take rate then was 18%. They were doing 18 million a month in net revenues, and they were burning 18 million a month, and they were valued at 2 billion. And I'm like, yes, they were growing really rapidly, but like that's really crazy. I mean, usually, where it felt really crazy because the economics were not there, and I'm very unit economic driven. Now, if you're doing 100 million a month in GMV, and you're growing.
Just again, sorry for the acronym.
Gross merchandise volume, like how much the drivers were, the passengers were paying for driving.
Yeah,
it's 2 billion is actually not a crazy valuation. It's just the economics were like so underwater that and the rides were subsidized that was worrying me. And sometimes you grow into the business and you make the economics better, and they ultimately did. But yeah, but there are a lot of misses like that. I mean, it also sold too early. I was in Tencent reasonably early, and I sold it at the IPO.
Yeah.
And since then, I think the stock is like multiplied by like 150.
All right. Okay. Fair enough. You just got to live with it, man. It sounds like it's working either way. So, so let's take a step back. Thanks for that introduction, and it really paints a picture of where you are today. We are in New York, and you grew up in France, and I should say actually we're here at Canal Street Market, and our partners Listing Party are hosting us today, so thank you to them. And you've been in New York, I think, for 20 plus years, but you grew up in France, right? And you can't actually hear, you don't have any French accent to me anyway. I just heard you speaking French or Spanish over there. So I could see that you still speak a bunch of languages. But, take me back to what the young Fabrice was like, because I always love to hear where people, the story before they get involved becoming entrepreneurs, because someone listening to this, there might be a college student or a 17-year-old listening to this. And I think it's always good just to hear your story from before.
So I mostly grew up in Nice. My family has been in Nice for hundreds of years, which is in the southeastern part of France, near the border with Italy, around Monaco or Cannes or Saint-Tropez, if you've heard of these places. And it was actually a really happy childhood. I mean, like, it's sunny 300 days of the year. Everything's inexpensive and close, so you can play tennis every day. There's actually skiing an hour away. You can take the bus for like $1.50 and go skiing like an hour and a half away. So an amazing quality of life. But as a kid, I was extraordinarily shy, extraordinarily introverted, but extremely smart and driven, and curious. I guess there was one high energy and curious, yet introverted and shy. So it was like an interesting combination where I would read infinite amounts of books on every topic possible. Obviously, be the number one in school, skip all the grades, and other than my dog, and until the age of 10. I was, I guess, building remote control cars and planes and playing tennis and skiing. That was really the things I did. But reading, being the best student in school. And at 10, in 1984, I guess Compaq just released their first PC a few maybe a year or two after IBM released their PC, and it was really love at first click. Like this created a world and an environment where I could have my creativity. So I wasn't creative in the sense that I couldn't paint, my handwriting was unreadable, I can sing, I can play an instrument, but being able to express myself by creating the worlds I wanted on a PC was like magical. And that computer also came with a with a modem, so I could connect to these bulletin board services, which are kind of the ancestors to the internet. And I started falling in love with PCs, building them, taking them apart, reselling them to my classmates, building a bulletin board system, programming, playing games. And I did all that because it was an amazing way for me to express my creativity, and it was an amazing outlet. But it was very different. I mean, in France at that time, there was Minitel. No one had computers. No one cared about computers. I was also younger in my class by like years, so it made me somewhat socially ostracized. People would love the nerds who have like know everything. And I think as a kid, I don't know, like life teaches you more modesty because you fail more often. But as a kid, I thought I knew everything, so I was really arrogant and judgmental, and I thought it was my way or the highway, and my value judgments were the right ones. So I was also a difficult kid from that perspective. Though, both as a kid to my parents, I was both perfect and difficult. Perfect in the sense that I did my homework like a month ahead of time. I was the best student in class. I never had friends. I never went out. I never did anything other than be perfect. Except it was also very difficult. Like if we were at the dinner table and, prototypical night, they're talking about whatever, the weather and soccer. And I'm like, you guys are not smart enough. And you're wasting my time. I'm going to read Tocqueville in my bedroom.
Did you have brothers and sisters?
I did. 2 younger brothers, one 11 years younger. So he wasn't really a big part of that. Yeah. And one who's 2 years younger, who's actually my polar opposite. So it was also a funny contrast.
What about your parents? Like, what did they do?
My family history is funny because my great grandmother was when she inherited a hotel. So in the 1800s, she was married to someone who owned a hotel. She inherited it and full of debt. And instead of like doing the usual thing of remarrying, she turned it around, became profitable, and started buying all these other hotels. Became one of the wealthiest women in the world in the 1800s.
Oh wow!
If not the wealthiest. She owned all the luxury hotels in Nice, all the residential real estate. But then, one generation makes it, and the next generation spend it. And by the time it was my grandparents' generation and my parents' generation, there was essentially nothing left.
Really? Okay.
But they had been used to the good life. Like they'd grown up with like the silver spoon in their mouth, and so they all, in their own way, found like their path for making a living, ideally without working. And so I look at my uncle as like this extraordinarily charming, good-looking gentleman. Now he's in his 80s, but like he became a professional tennis player at a time where it was an amateur sport, and he was Davis Cup player for France. He won the Australian Open, world champion junior. But it didn't make any money. And so then he converted that by being so charming, by hanging out with like billionaires on the beaches of Saint-Tropez. Yeah. And he became this backgammon player. He became world champion at backgammon. He started playing money.
This is your granddad?
This is my uncle. But this is a like reflection of like the entire family. Of like people like finding interesting ways to having an amazing life without actually really working. Now, my father was actually the only one who worked in the family. He got his MBA at UCLA, and then he worked for...
How does that work, by the way? Because if you're in France, how easy is it just to go to the States? And
well, for business school, easier. For college, really hard. Okay. And especially really hard back in the day where there was no Google. So there was no easy way to like, how do I apply to U.S. university? Yeah. And what are the requirements? So I literally, during my 11th grade, during the summer, went to the U.S. and visited every school and like asked the stupid question, how do you want to apply here? And they're like, oh, this is the application. And you have to take this thing called the SAT, which of course in France we'd never heard of. Yeah. I didn't even know you could study for the SAT or practice for it. Like there's no knowledge. But there's one school near Nice where you could take it like once or twice a year. So I took it. We literally walked in, not knowing what to expect. Yeah. Now, I happen to be really good at math, so I did really well there. But probably the lowest verbal SAT score in the history of Princeton. Like, I'm probably one of the lowest entry scores ever in the history of Princeton. I didn't speak English for that well, and but I think from a diversity perspective, like no one from France applies to U.S. colleges. Literally, I was the only French student on all of Princeton, like all years, including grad students, which is like 5,000 students. So somehow on a diversity admittance, they let me in.
Diversity at Princeton, just a French.
I know. Well, that was kind of a joke, but I got in, and it was great. I really loved it. Despite the fact, I got there did not speak English, and that's why I decided I needed to learn English perfectly. But the intellectual curiosity available. I mean, for the first time in my life, I get there, and you get these hundreds of pages of classes that you can take. And I went crazy. I mean, I studied molecular biology, organic chemistry, electrical engineering, computer science, but also like the Polynesian War and Russian literature, and you name it, I studied it. And there are more Nobel Prize winners on the campus of Princeton than all of France. And in France, teachers speak at you. You don't have a dialogue, et cetera. Now you have these Nobel Prize winners who have like these office hours, and they're waiting to talk to you. And frankly, they may have had their 5 minutes of fame when they got the Nobel, but no one reads academic papers. And so if someone, even who's not taking their class, wants to go chat with them, they're more happy to do that. And so I was like a fish in water. Like, if you're curious, going to college, you can make the most of it. Like, you have all these fascinating people thinking about all these interesting problems that you can allocate time to.
That's an interesting point, because I feel like so many people think of college as being this place, and understandably, it's a big time and financial investment for a lot of people, for everyone. But, even for myself, like, I feel like I learned more about, I studied business and economics, but I probably learned, 100 times more about that in the practical world and working than I did at college. But the people I met and the times I had there were still valuable for me to go. And it's also the time, like, if you're a college student listening to this, which I know there are a few people listening from a bunch of different colleges, like, to get that time, you don't really ever get that time again, unless you really force it, and once you start working, or you start a company, or you get family, like, you don't get like 3-4 years of just like that time to just explore and do different things.
Yeah, so it was wonderful. I mean, look, I also started one of my first companies there to help pay for college. And
which one was that? Sorry,
it was export business of computer equipment from the U.S. to Europe. So it was not real scalable business, but it was like arbitrage. But this happened to be cash flow profitable from day one, and really paid for my quality of life.
Where do you think that came from? Like this, your urge to sell a product or to start a company, like, just seeing that as an option. Do you remember where that kind of...
yeah. I mean, look, I was building computers and selling them to my classmates in school in France. When I got to the U.S., I realized pretty quickly, like, retail prices in the U.S. were way lower than even wholesale prices in France. And because I was a computer nerd, I'd become friends with all the computer store owners around my grandmother's place in Nice. I mean, literally my best friends I met at those computer stores. And so I decided to create a company that would buy wholesale in the U.S. and sell to the retail stores in France. They would pay me up front. I would pay them 30 days later. So it was like cash flow positive day zero with a nice margin. And it was still cheaper for them to source through me. And at that time, people like Intel would like release in Europe like a year later. And so that paid for college. Now, it's not a real business because I didn't have no employees. It's not scalable. The arbitrage obviously was meant to disappear at some point. But in terms of like understanding how to make a business work, cash flows, getting accounting,
seeing the opportunity,
super useful. And it was great.
Great, Matt. I feel like we could probably talk for 5 hours about this whole time, and maybe we'll get to do that another time. But for the sake of time, we'll skip ahead because in stark contrast to your grandmother and that side of the family being one of the richest people in the world at one point, to the ramen eating Fabrice. And I've heard you talk about living for 2 years on $2 a day. And I'm curious, like, what time of your life was this? It sounds like startup mode, once you'd already started a company and you were really struggling to make payroll for your employees and that sort of stuff. Take me back to that time, that 2 year period. Like, where were you and what was going on?
Yeah, I mean, so by my parents' generation, there was essentially nothing left. And we started reasonably... middle class, but actually my parents did pretty well and started rising through. My dad was working for a leveraged buyout shop and did pretty well. But then, of course, I in a way left the family and went I'm on my own in the U.S. And when I was 17, But I actually left having built my first little arbitrage business. I actually left college at 21, top of my class, and I actually had 50K in the bank. And so with that 50K, I put 25K in 4 stocks, which are Microsoft, Yahoo, Intel, and Amazon. 25K, I bought a 1-bedroom apartment in New York for 115,000, which shows you how much prices have increased.
What year is this?
96.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And the rest I borrowed, obviously.
Yeah.
And in 98, so I did McKinsey and Company. I learned what I felt I needed to learn. So it was like business school, except they pay you. I went there knowing I wanted to be a tech entrepreneur. In 98, sold everything. I had net of taxes of 300K. And that became the seed funding for my first real big startup, which is an eBay type company for Southern Europe and France. And that grew and became very successful. I mean, we were like 10 million a month in gross merchandise sale, raised overall like over 60 million in venture money. And being 23, 24 is like on the cover of like the Forbes of France. And
this is just before the big bubble burst.
And that's before the bubble burst. So everything was great. It was like a top of the world. On paper, I was worth hundreds of millions of dollars. And I was very well aware of the difference between paper and not paper because I really didn't have that much money. I was like sleeping between the office or my aunt's attic in Paris. And so I didn't really pay myself because I wanted to prove my commitment and put it all on the line for the company. Sadly, long story short, the bubble burst. We still had the opportunity to grab victory from the jaws of defeat by my majority shareholder didn't listen to me. We sold to the wrong company. Their stock fell 99.98%.
Wow.
And I left with almost nothing, even though my company had been worth like hundreds of millions. And in fact, we had a buyout offer from eBay for like 300 million, which sadly...
Why didn't you sell?
I wanted to, but my Bernard Arnault, who's the owner of LVMH, who's like one of the richest people in Europe, at the time, who had 50.1% of the company, said to refuse to sell because, long story short, but so he didn't want to sell. So ultimately, lost everything. I think I still left with a fair amount of money. Though I probably would have made more money just keeping the money in my apartment in New York and the stock. I think I left with like 700K. And that point, I went through. Okay, what do I do now? And I wrote one of those first emails evaluating my options. And ultimately, I'm like, I didn't do this for money. I did this because I like being a tech entrepreneur. I happen to have been at the right time, at the right place, with the right skills, and not maybe capitalize on the bubble. But I don't see myself as employable. I don't want to be anyone's employee. I want to be an entrepreneur. And so I'm willing to compromise on anything and everything to be an entrepreneur, including the idea that I pick, and the things that I do. The only thing that matters is being an entrepreneur. And so in a world where the capital is completely constrained because there's no venture money, venture capital has disappeared, all the direct-to-consumer companies...
Because this is post-bubble now,
This is 2001.
Yeah.
All the BDC companies have gone under, all the telecom companies have gone under, all the VCs have stopped investing. But I want to be an entrepreneur. What do I do? And I came across this idea that was working really well in Europe and Asia of like selling ringtones and games on mobile phones, but before the smartphone era. And came to the US to see if there was an opportunity. It was really early. There was no text messaging. There was no billing systems.
Yeah.
So a few of the companies that could have done it decided didn't want to do it. I'm like, I think I can make this profitable with not that much capital. And I had 700,000 in the bank from the last experience. And so little by little, as I was building the company, I invested pretty much everything I had to the point I had nothing left. And then I borrowed 100,000 on my credit cards until I could no longer borrow.
So you spent the 700 grand that you'd... So, because, 700 grand still a lot of money, obviously not compared to hundreds of millions that you were potentially worth on paper. But just you burnt for all of that.
All of it, yeah. Well, because I couldn't raise any venture money. Like if I called a VC and told them I have this amazing consumer-facing telecom idea, I don't think I'd finish the sentence so they hung up, you know. And if there was, I was the source of capital, so I didn't really pay myself until I got to zero. And now I did raise, and so over the course of, I started the company July 2 of 2001, and until August 15, 2003. Over that period of time, missed payroll 27 times.
Yeah.
Because I would run out of money, but I would find if I met anyone, I would like, I have this amazing idea, you should invest. And I ended up raising like another $1 million, but I raised it in like 5K increments.
That's crazy.
And so every few months, I would tell the employees, I don't understand. The bank made it yet another mistake. I don't understand why they keep screwing up. Of course, there was no money in the account. That's why they didn't make payroll. And eventually, I'd make payroll. But in that period, there was essentially a year and a half where I couldn't even afford coffee, you know. So I slept on the office in the couch. I
You
showered
didn't
in the
have an
office.
apartment.
Well, I couldn't afford it.
So that's crazy. All right. So, wow, I didn't actually know that. So
Yeah.
So you slept in the office,
Showered in the office.
showered in the office. Did people know that? Like your employees?
Some did, some didn't.
That's hilarious. I mean, it's hilarious now because you're doing better. But just so you were there for a year and a half. That's a long time.
Yeah. I mean, so the only thing I could afford was ramen noodles. I lost like 20 pounds, as you can imagine, or maybe 30 pounds.
Because it's such a cliche thing people say, like ramen noodle diet, but it's actually like you legitimately were doing that.
I didn't have a choice. It's the only thing I could afford. Exactly. Cheap nutritionist food. Until, and that was the most meaningful moment, frankly, in my entrepreneurial life, we became cash flow positive. And that's the day that changed everything. And that was August 15, 2003, where we got the check from Sprint that made us profitable. And then I knew we were safe. But at that time period, we'd gone from like 27 employees to 7 last. I didn't pay people for 4.5 months. And when you stop paying people, they stop showing up for work for some reason.
Yeah.
So it had been tight. I had started coding again because I knew we were down on coders, but we made it. And after that, it became a rocket ship.
So what was that feeling like, man? When you got like a 500K check, I think, was it?
Yeah, 548K or something like that.
So
Yeah,
which is
it was like
feel like winning
relief.
the lottery? Yeah.
Now the problem is, but that. I mean, it's not like relief. I couldn't pay anything. I just paid back pay for the employees. I paid the rent. I paid my credit card bills.
Yeah.
It was like relief that we're like, we had made it. The problem is I told people we'd made it so many times before, the employees, that like actually employees 2 and 3, actually no, 3 and 4 left the company that day because it's like
Really?
You know, the boy who cried wolf once too often. Like they'd heard it many times that we'd been saved. And they just didn't believe me anymore. And they were also older, had kids, et cetera. And like they couldn't deal with that. But I knew we were safe then. And then it became a crazy rocket ship. I mean, the company went from $1 million in 2002 to $5 million in 2003 to $50 million in 2004 to $200 million in 2005 in revenues. And we became profitable. And we were very profitable both in 04 and 05. Now, this time I sold it too early, but I'd learned my lesson. Too early, better than too late.
Yeah.
In cash. And again, cash better than stock. In June 2004, and sold it for $80 million, and I owned about half the company. But that day was way less meaningful for me than the day I became profitable, 9 months earlier, which was the day where like I knew we were safe. Because at that point, when I sold it, I was so busy. Like we had grown to like whatever, almost 80 people, on the way to growing to like 200 people, and working day and night. It literally didn't change anything. I still lived in my like studio apartment for like another like 3 or 4 years, and the only thing I think I did is like I bought an Xbox, a TV, and 2 tennis rackets. You know.
And this might sound like an obvious question, but just so I understand how it works, if you sell a company for 80 million and you own 50%, you clear 40 million. Is that how it works? Is there a lot?
Well, you're forgetting a few.
Tax.
Yeah, you're forgetting Uncle Sam.
Yeah.
And the wonderful state of New York,
Yeah.
who won their slice of the pie. Also was paid half upfront, or a little bit more than half upfront, the rest on an earn-out, et cetera. No, net of everything. So on paper, gross, maybe I should have cleared 43.6 million or something like that. But net of taxes, it's like 26.
Okay.
Yeah, something like that. But still really nice to have when you're 29.
Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah. So that is a huge change.
But it didn't feel like it.
That's interesting.
I don't know. Like I was so busy, like building. We were growing like crazy. We're signing all the operators. We were launching new product lines. We were doing acquisitions. It didn't feel like a change.
It didn't make you feel like, okay, because technically with that amount of money, you could probably not. You don't really have to work again if you didn't want to, right? So did it not sink in? Did that?
Not really.
No,
not really. No, and I didn't really change anything in my life for years. Yeah, no, it didn't sink in. I'd like it. It felt for me. It was more like, now I have the freedom to do whatever I want to do, and I can now go and build companies I want to build, because I didn't like Zingy. I did not like. I didn't like ringtones as a product per se. I think they had marginal social value. I didn't like, frankly, doing deals with the mobile operators. They were slow and conservative. They didn't really understand anything. I hated the music companies, especially the labels. They didn't even understand their own self-best interest at heart. They didn't want to give licenses. I didn't like the music publishers. Frankly, I thought the artists were idiots. Even though I got to hang out with like many artists, like, and I won't say which ones are artists, but like from Stu Doc to 50 Cent to like Eminem to whatever, like and I didn't like necessarily the audiences I was catering to. So, and yet it didn't matter. Like I did the business because I wanted to be an entrepreneur and I needed something that could be profitable. And that was what I was willing to sacrifice for. But now that I had capital, I could go back to my really first true love, which is build companies that I really want to build that are marketplaces.
It's such an interesting point because I think in today's world we see all these headlines of so and so sold this for X million and billions nowadays, right? And hundreds of millions, and even when you see revenue of a company, public company is $60-80 billion. Like people don't realize that like that's a crazy amount of money, and like for what the entrepreneur actually takes away is often nowhere near in proportion to that. And also the main point I was going to make was I've heard on other podcasts and people I speak to say, like, okay, if I made that amount of money, then I would just be done. And like, why are these people just, like, are they psychopaths? They just keep going and keep going. And my point to them always is, look, I've never been in that position, so I can only speak from what I've heard from people like yourself. Like, you weren't doing it for that in the first place. Like, I'm sure you wanted to make money, but like, you made enough money to not have to work again, and you kept going. And what I love what you just said there is you said, well, now I can finally do what I wanted to do all along. And it kind of begs the question, why weren't you just doing that all along in the first place?
So in a way, it's a two-part question. Yeah, I never did it for the money. Like I thought when I was starting Zingy that it was not going to be that profitable or make that much money, and it didn't matter. I thought it would be a fun way to be an entrepreneur and an interesting way to be an entrepreneur, and I liked that process. It just turns out that the internet wasn't dead after all, and that the markets turned around, and I did rather better than I expected.
Yeah.
Now, why I wasn't doing all along what I wanted is capital was not available. I mean, like the to build most startups, you take years to become profitable. You need a certain level of scale. You need to find your product market fit. You need and take millions, right? Like the way the venture environment works is you typically have like your fools, friends, and family, a couple $100K of money to launch and get going. Then you raise a pre-seed round of like $1 million to scale up to like $100K a month in sales, $150K a month. Then you raise $2-3 million in a seed round for people like me. Then you raise like $5 to $7 million or $8 million in Series A, and then you raise a 15 to 20 million Series B. And in all these points, you're not profitable. So by the time where you're kind of expecting to be profitable, you've deployed $30, $40, $50 million. And I just lived in a world, and the ideas that I wanted to build needed that type of capital.
Okay.
And I lived in a world where there's no capital available other than the $700K I had in my bank account and my $100K on my credit cards.
Yeah.
And I'm like, what can I build with that constraint that can be profitable? And that's a real tech business. I didn't want to build, like a mom and pop corner store. And that's the idea I came up with. I mean, it wasn't necessarily the best idea, but it worked, and it got me to where I needed to be to then go build the companies I truly, really wanted to build.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, that's interesting. One other thing I did want to ask is because this is something that's been coming up a lot. There's a lot of talk about mental health and anxiety and managing stress and all the antidotes to that, which is great, and I'm so glad we are talking about those things. What you just described to me there sounds so stressful, right? Like sleeping in, it's not necessarily about sleeping on the couch and like eating ramen noodles. It's more so the other people that you're not being able to pay and the stress of that. For me personally, like if I was going through that, I feel like that is what would take the biggest toll on me. So like, I just love your face there, and when we do the video, we'll be able to show your reaction to that from the face. But like, you were like, yeah, kind of, but not really.
You don't know and you don't know the half of it. And we were being sued for billions of dollars of copyright infringement. It was like, oh yes, yet another cease and desist letter. And like, the employees of my company would look at this and be like, what the hell? Like, are you not scared by like billions of dollars of cease and desist? And I would call the lawyers and I'm like, hey, I'm so glad that you finally reached out. I've been trying to work with you for a long, and like they'd be so taken aback by my like happiness and like them sending me multi-billion-dollar season.
What do you think? Like, do you think that's something natural to your DNA, or do you think that's something you've cultivated? Like, is that something someone listening to this can improve in their own lives? That's kind of what I'm trying to get to.
Yeah. So in a way, I'm blessed that I've been built happy. And I'm built happy because I've had two fundamental tenets of happiness, I guess, somehow ingrained in me. I've always been optimistic, both about my personal destiny, but about humanity's journey and destiny.
Yeah.
And grateful for my life circumstances, the fact that I was born in the late 20th century in the West, where the opportunities available to me are extraordinary, much more so than at any time in prior history of humanity, and frankly, better to be born there than any other geography today. And grateful for the parents I had, the education, and the childhood I had. And so those two fundamental tenets. Now, in terms of not being stressed by the fact that I was essentially bankrupt, that things could go haywire, is the reason I don't worry about flying without a safety net is I think I have confidence in my skills, that my safety net is my ability to execute and deliver, and I could always land on my feet. Because the reality is, how bad could it really get? Okay, so if I'd lost everything and gotten completely bankrupt, I'm sure I could get a job at McKinsey.
Yeah.
I'm sure I could get a job at another startup. But it's not as though it's like I'm going to be homeless in the streets.
It's like the worst case scenario. You think that through, and you say,
worst case scenario, I'll find something to do, and I'm sure it'll be compensated well enough that I can make a living, right? And so if you have the confidence to think that that's true, and I think, by the way, that's true for almost everyone in the world. So people are more risk averse than they should be. The downside is not you're going to be living under a bridge. The downside is you're going to take a more boring job, but it pays the bills and it's okay. And so it never bothered me. And I figured let's go broke. And frankly, the process is interesting. The process of building companies is interesting. So as I said, I didn't actually like the products I was building, but I liked building them.
Yeah.
I didn't like the things I was selling, but I liked the making the product and finding the product market fit. All the process of it, the sausage making was more interesting to me than the sausage itself.
Yeah, no, I love that, man. And if you're listening to this on the podcast, I would urge you to go onto YouTube and watch this, at least for this 5-minute snippet, because just seeing your face, you look like a joyful child, if you don't mind me being frank. I love that, and it's such a refreshing thing to see.
But I have studied happiness, and there are things that you can do to statistically significantly increase your mean level of happiness, right? So most people, through education and genes, by the age of 18 or 21, there are 7 out of 10 on the mean level happiness scale. And there's something called hedonic adaptation, where you adjust pretty quickly to changes in your circumstances, which is why working for more money is a bad thing, because if you're a miserable grouch and you win the lottery, you can be a miserable grouch in a Ferrari. Yeah. And if you're happy-go-lucky and you get in a car accident, you're going to be happy-go-lucky in a wheelchair. And so those things don't really matter, but there are 10 things, and we don't need to go through them, that you can do to statistically significantly, sustainably increase your mean level of happiness. And there was both the theory of it, because telling people be grateful is easy, but then there's silly things you can do to be more grateful. Every day, write down before you go to bed 3 wonderful, beautiful things that happened to you. And they can be simple. They can be someone smiled at me. Yeah. It was sunny. I thought of something wonderful. Or in these little things, practicing gratitude, for instance, and this is one of the 10. But the other one, same thing. There's a theory and then an action. And the actions are very simple, because humans are such simple-minded creatures. You think you're happy, therefore you smile. But if you smile, you become happier. And so there's reverse causality, and it's so wonderful. But I study behavioral economics and happiness and a lot of other topics.
I'd love to hear, actually, if you don't mind, some of the others that stand out to you, because I actually do. It sounds so cheesy and woo-woo sometimes, right? But I do it every day. I write every morning. I write 3 things that in the last 24 hours, and they're often really basic things. And you become, nowadays we're talking about mindfulness, but it really takes you to that moment. Yesterday I wrote the cup of coffee that I had, and I talked to my parents who are actually in Pakistan right now, and I spoke to them on FaceTime, and that was I was oh, I'm so grateful that I get to speak to them, right? They won't be there forever.
But by the way, if they're in Pakistan, they should know OLX.
I did. I actually asked them, and they're only visiting right now. They live in London, but I messaged them last night on WhatsApp, and they did say, my dad said it's a big deal there.
Oh, so. It's huge in Pakistan. So, and by the way, you should do it before you go to bed and not when you wake up. Okay. Yes, because I'm reading a book right now on why we sleep, and it explains the process of sleeping and the value of it. But basically, it's like memory consolidation, and it's a means of transferring into your subconsciousness as well the things that you've done during the day. And so, if you practice gratitude right before you go to bed, you're much more likely to like incorporate it into your underlying like subconscious nature as you sleep on it. Like often, if you want to remember something, it's actually great to read it right before you go to bed.
Yeah.
You're more like, or if you think about a problem right before you go to bed, and often you wake up and you have like that eureka moment. And so it's actually so. But yeah, the other ones are be optimistic and. Because if there are two versions of yourself, and one of you, identical versions, born at the same time, maybe dead at the same time, but one of you is optimistic, the other one is pessimistic, which of the two of you do you think is going to have the better life? Or like clearly the optimist, even though maybe a little bit delusional. Now, if you're not built optimistic, you can kind of cheat. And by taking a pause, right? So if you read Daniel Kahneman's Think Fast, Slow, we have these two minds and these two systems. The limbic system, which is like impulsive, and then the rational, slow mind. And many people were pessimists at heart. That's their innate reaction. But if you stop when you have a thought, and you actually then deliberately evaluate, is this positive or negative? And if it's negative, what is the positive way to look at this? And there's always a positive. You can actually change your mind. And if you keep doing it, all of a sudden, after a few weeks, month, the positive thought will come immediately. Now, other things are easier, like exercise every day. It like releases endorphin and adrenaline.
Sleep.
Give your body the sleep it needs. Now, it may need 10, it may need 6, it may need 3, it may need, but for most people, it's around 8. Find love. And again, love comes in many ways, shapes, and forms. It's not necessarily the love of a significant other. It could be the love of your family, the love of your pets, and because being loved is meaningful and extraordinary. Have a few or at least one meaningful relationship, because humans are quintessentially social animals, and so we really truly exist to the extent you exist in the eyes of others. So if you have an amazing experience, but you're actually not telling anyone that is meaningful to you about it, it's not as powerful an experience. But if you have even just one person, and it doesn't matter if it's your best friend, your parent, your sibling, or your significant other, about these experiences, and they appreciate them, etc., they make them so much more powerful. I won't go through
that's
it.
great.
But there are many others, like don't equate money with happiness, because money doesn't actually ultimately be on a basic level change your whether you have a 1-bedroom apartment or a 5-bedroom apartment, you have an apartment and a roof over your head. Your belly is full. It doesn't really change anything. So make sure you do things because you love doing them, rather than like pursue that.
And I've looked at that a little bit as well, like how money equates to happiness, right? And it feels like if you're really poor and you don't have basic needs met,
it's a huge issue.
Then it's a huge issue. But there's diminishing returns after a certain amount, and it depends what numbers you look at and which country you live in, etc. But just, I think that's a great point, and it is a great lesson for someone listening to this. You have enough money to never work again, and you are telling us that it doesn't make you happier. So it's a good
look. I'm built happy,
lesson.
but I love the life I lead, and the reason I work is because I get great pride and meaning out of it.
So that's a great transition. We talked about optimism, so I do want to talk about the future of marketplaces in a minute. You like this transition. The optimism that you just talked about, we were talking just before we started recording, and you said that you still think we're at the beginning of this big tech revolution. And someone listening in 2019 or in 2021 is listening to this, and they're saying, what are you talking about? We've been doing this for 20 years. We've had smartphones and more than 20 years, but most people have had the internet for 20 years in the Western world anyway. So I'd love to hear your logic, and I agree with you on this, but just to share your perspective on why are we still at the beginning. And I've heard you even say we're in the first innings if you're a baseball fan, or the first 1%, whatever you want to call it. So why do you think that's the case?
We're at the very beginning. The thing that has most gone online, which is commerce, only 10% of sales in retail or online. So you still have 90% to go. And in places like China, it's 25%. But if you go to the other categories, it's peanuts. And even commerce in certain categories like, home improvement, it's 98.5% offline. grocery shopping, it's like 99% offline. And if you go to like the fundamental pillars of the U.S. economy, right? So you have like the government, public services.
Yeah.
That's like when you include local governments that are like maybe like 40% of GDP, none of that is online, and productivity has been negative over the last, frankly, century. Healthcare in the U.S. is
So what do you mean by that? Productivity has been
meaning
negative?
the government is doing less with more.
Okay.
They have more money, and they're actually being less productive in terms of what they do. Like if you look at all the public infrastructure projects, we built the Golden Gate Bridge in like 2.5 years with like $2.5 billion of today's money.
Okay.
And today it took them 13 years and $11 billion to build the access road to it.
Okay, that's what I mean.
Or the number of civil servants and government workers required to do anything. Like that number has increased dramatically. So there's massive overhead and bureaucracy and red tape that has come. So public services have had negative productivity.
Okay.
Frankly, healthcare, for the most part, has had negative productivity. Today, it's like almost 20% of GDP in the U.S. and it's so inefficient. Almost none of it is online, and almost none of it is automated, and it's ripe for disruption. And same thing for education. If I go back 2,500 years, and I teleport Socrates from then to today, and I show him the world, he would be like amazed. We have like flying vehicles, wireless communications. But one thing he would recognize is the way we teach our kids. Like a teacher of varying quality, teaching a class of varying quality students by spewing out facts and then like testing them those facts. It's really not a very efficient mechanism of instilling
How would you
knowledge
change
to people. I think ultimately we're going to have the technology to create quasi-personalized education where you can actually have different speeds for the different students and to keep them challenging. Like today, because schools are built for the average, like I was bored in school. I skipped 2 grades, and I was I was so underutilized from an intellectual capacity perspective.
Yeah.
I on the side was like programming and building computers and like trying to challenge myself. Like I was doing multivariable calculus when I was like 14. Everything was boring. Like I could have been so much more challenged, and having had like personalized computer education at my level, I think would have been way more interesting. And there are a whole bunch of other ways to also improve the mean, right? Like we're doing, especially in this country, we're failing. Because public schools are funded by property taxes, bad schools, bad neighborhoods, bad neighborhoods, bad schools, good neighborhoods, good schools. We're eliminating equality of opportunity. But this is happening, across the board. And the beauty and the reason I'm investing in technology writ large, and the reason I'm building tech startups, I thought long and hard, like what is the meaning of my life? Where do I have the most impact in terms of improving the world the most? And as a kid, with my delusions of grandeur, I'm like, oh, maybe I should be a politician and president of a country, et cetera. But ultimately today, even the president of the U.S. has extraordinarily little power. He has a lot of power in a tiny box with a million checks and balances and can't really change anything. Yeah. And the people that have improved the lives of others the most have actually been tech entrepreneurs, because they've made things a lot cheaper. Technology is deflationary. It makes food a lot cheaper. It makes your life a lot cheaper. I mean, think of it differently. 200 years ago, we were all farmers who could basically barely make ends meet. We were 94% of us were in extreme poverty. We were hungry most of the time. We had no vacation because we had to toil the land all the time. And because of robotics, technology, automation, now we have 3% of the people that work as farmers, and we have excess food production, and we can feed the entire world. And we've become so, in a way, wealthy, we don't need to work all that much. We're now working like 40 hours a week or less to actually and we have vacation and a quality of life unheard of. And that deflationary power of technology is continuing. And in fact, it's continuing. It's much more powerful than the increase in GDP per capita. So over the last 100 years, GDP per capita has tripled, but food costs have divided by 10. Communication costs have divided by like 1 million. I mean, the cost equivalent of a few words by telegraph 120 years ago was insane. And today you have like free unlimited calls anywhere around the world. And I mean, people don't realize the quality even in our lifetime. When I was a kid, only the rich took planes. And now, because of technology with yield management systems and automatic traffic control systems, the cost of flights have decreased dramatically. The cost of communications have decreased dramatically. And that's really continuing. And that's what's making me optimistic because we're going to be in a position to apply these same improvements in all the categories that have not yet seen any productivity improvements from technology and be deflationary. And so our quality of life is about to improve dramatically.
Yeah. What would you say to someone, because I feel the same in many ways. That's why I've worked in technology for many years as well. And I was kind of like the geeky kid on a computer, similar to yourself, many years ago too. But I feel like we've gone through this last 10 years where tech startups were very cool, and even companies like Google and Facebook were these big emerging drivers of the economy, and everyone's got a smartphone and all these different things. But now it feels very much like that has changed quite significantly in the last 2, 3, 4 years, especially with, I don't want to even call them scandals, but some of them were scandals. The Facebook stuff that happened with Cambridge Analytica, people being scared about being monitored all the time, and all those different things that come with power with the tech companies. So there are a lot of people right now saying the opposite, and in my opinion is slightly disproportionate to what is actually going on. But they are saying, okay, yeah, they might have done some good, but they are now too powerful. We need to break them up. Like Elizabeth Warren just wrote this recently. Professor Galloway from the NYU has talked about that as well. So, what is your take on that? Like, do you think, are they being evil, these companies? Are they being negative for society in ways too? Like, where's the balance?
Well, first of all, you have to. There's pros and cons. Like technology itself is agnostic, right? Like it's and you can use technology to do great things or to do bad things. Nuclear weapons or nuclear energy, and Facebook has been an amazing force for good in terms of like disseminating information and allowing people to organize, et cetera, in places and pro-democracy movement. But at the same time, it can be used to spread fake news, et cetera. So, but is it them doing it? Not really. Now, could they do a better job at monitoring the platform? But yes, and actually, I think they are reacting and they are doing their best. I mean, it's actually a really hard job to filter content when you have millions of people trying to upload things, many of which may be negative, and also finding, and because the negative things are a small percentage of the overall, finding them is like kind of finding the needle in the haystack. Now, there are a few things you touched upon. Like, first of all, these companies were built, mostly completely legally by out-competing their competitors. It's not as though they came in, did anything illegal. And so bringing them up, I think, is actually probably ill-advised and ill-judged because there's actually massive benefits of scale. I mean, ultimately, once you have these types of economies of scale, they can offer a lot of these services for free. And by the way, I think the privacy issues are overblown because they've asked people, would you want to control your privacy in exchange you pay for these services like a couple dollars a month? And no one's actually willing to pay for Facebook for $2 a month or to pay Google a few dollars a month. And what's interesting is it's actually, I think, a pretty interesting trade because your data is not valuable to you because you cannot sell it. But Google aggregating your data or Facebook aggregating your data to make overarching trends can actually monetize it better than you. And so I actually think it's an example of like of an efficient economic trade where you're getting a service for free in exchange for data that you don't particularly value, but they can actually value and monetize. Now, should there be probably more controls on how you control it, what they can do with it, et cetera? Yeah, probably. And should there be more maybe antitrust considerations on mergers and acquisitions before they happen? Yes, I wouldn't try to ex post change the past, but like making sure that you don't have too much concentrated power in mergers and acquisitions today to make sure that the incumbents don't stay there forever. Absolutely. But what worries me is the regulatory approach and frameworks people are suggesting actually would do the exact opposite of what is intended. What you need to create is a very competitive and dynamic environment where startups can disrupt the incumbents. And if you create a framework that is really harsh and very difficult and very expensive and onerous, only the rich established companies can deal with it. And that would like basically entrench them in their positions forever and would make startups basically never be able to disrupt them. And so it's literally the opposite response of what you should be doing. You should be making sure that they don't have anti-competitive practices in their operations today, that they don't buy people that would consolidate too much power. But you should definitely not create a regulatory framework that's so onerous that startups cannot compete. Otherwise, you're basically giving them power forever. And historically, over time, the regulators become co-opted by the industry, and they will become their defenders. And that's what happened in every industry. I'm sure it would happen here as well. So I would tread lightly, especially since it's such a massive creator of job growth and optimism. And frankly, people don't realize how much our lives have been improved by these things. I mean, today, if you're a Maasai warrior in Tanzania with a smartphone, you have the sum total of humanity's knowledge in your pocket. You have access to more global communications that the president of the U.S. had 30 years ago.
Yeah.
That is mind-boggling. And this wasn't brought by government. This was brought by startups and technology companies and entrepreneurs who are really, truly making the world a better place. And you don't want that to end.
Yeah, I agree. And I think my take on it is, just to put my 2 cents in, is that I think Google, Facebook, Amazon, etc., can be doing a better job in many ways, but so can everyone. So can the government in many ways too. So I think I heard Professor Galloway, who is, I love Professor Galloway. I think he's amazing. I read his email every week, and he's a really smart guy. But I heard him talking, I think, with Recodes or Kara Swisher or someone like that, and they were talking about tech companies being like tobacco companies, and that to me was just the craziest false equivalency you can think of, as one is a tobacco. You know, I think what he was trying to say is they're addictive, right? Like Facebook and social media is addictive, and there's negative externalities he was talking about. Whereas a tobacco company is clearly there killing people with, smoke that turns into cancer, and these tech companies are generally giving away a free service, completely free, and have changed communication, changed access to information, etc., and commerce with Amazon. And yeah, of course, they're making a bunch of money, and there's nothing wrong with that. And there are things they can change as well.
Yeah, but I think it's beyond that. Like, the reason I like tech is we improve user experiences. Like, think of getting a taxi before Uber came along. I mean, and Uber's created millions of jobs that are high-paying, unskilled jobs, and people don't seem to value and realize how life-affirming and transforming it's been for both users and drivers, and the opportunities that's created. Yeah.
So for the sake of time, we'll move on. But that was I wasn't planning to talk about that, but that was a good discussion on that. Let's talk about marketplaces, because you are probably, if there was one person in the whole world I wanted to talk about marketplaces with, it's probably you. So for someone listening, how do you define a marketplace in a very succinct way? Because there's I think there's varying degrees of marketplaces, and I'd love to hear your take on that.
Yeah. A marketplace is basically an intermediary, or a place where it's a place. I mean, the general definition, not the online definition. It's a place where buyers and sellers meet and interact and trade. And this started, of course, in the Roman times with the agoras and the markets, where you had the little shopkeepers and people come in and buy. Today, in the concept of an online marketplace, you can buy and sell anything, and things like, of course, the original marketplaces like Craigslist or eBay, you buy and sell goods, or you look for a house, etc. But you have things like Upwork, which is a remote work marketplace where you can hire developers or someone to make your photo album. Or you have things like Thumbtack, which is a marketplace to find a plumber. And so you have marketplaces in really all these different industries and categories. But many things that you may not even think of as marketplaces. Uber is a marketplace because the drivers don't work for Uber. It's a matching system between passengers and drivers. Yeah. Uber Eats is actually a three-way marketplace between the consumers who are ordering food, the restaurants who are making the food, and the delivery people that are delivering food. And so, many, many things are marketplaces. It's basically an intermediary between a buyer and a seller. And buyer and seller at large. It could be of a service, it could be of a product, it could be of anything.
Okay, that's great. I think that's a great place to start. And I went through one of your recent presentations, and you talked about the kind of things to know for marketplace entrepreneurs going forward. And one of the things you talked about was this macro trend of verticalization of horizontals, right? So a few examples of that, if you take Craigslist as this massive classified site, and I've actually got a sheet here right now. I've printed out Craigslist. I'll give that to you because we're going to go through that in a second. And, if you think of Craigslist, it has everything from jobs to here's my sofa that I need to sell, or here's my sofa that I want to swap. Here's a sofa, take it for free. there's so many different verticals, and there's this famous slide which I think I've also printed out here, which is over here, which basically shows all the different startups that have now basically become startups based on Craigslist classifieds almost. But what's this concept of verticalization of horizontals, and could you give a few examples of how that's evolving?
Sure. The concept is that if you're going after a very specific category, you can do a better job than the site that's trying to do a little bit of everything.
Generic, yeah.
And you can build, the users and betters, you can have a better customer care experience, and you can build, frankly, features and functionality that they will never build for that vertical. I mean, two prototypical examples would be StubHub versus buying, selling tickets on eBay before eBay bought StubHub, or on Craigslist. I mean, StubHub introduced seating charts of all the different venues. They started doing ticket authentication to make sure they were legitimate tickets. They started integrating with the e-ticket providers like Ticketmaster. All those things Craigslist or eBay would never do. And so those led to a much bigger, better user experience, which led to the category growing dramatically. Airbnb is another example. Airbnb existed in a way in a sublet model on Craigslist, but it wasn't very big because it was a pain in the neck. You didn't have a calendar management system. You didn't have an insurance system. You didn't have a payment system. You didn't have a rating system. And once all these features were added, the category grew dramatically. I mean, Airbnb on Craigslist, it was estimated that this business was sub $1 billion a year in overall volume. And Airbnb alone today is doing like 30 or 40 billion in volume a year. So normally, it didn't just take the category away; it actually grew the category dramatically by creating these user experiences. And even things that feel like niches can become very big. So there's a company called Reverb. Reverb is a
music equipment.
It's a music equipment marketplace for guitars, etc. And they're now, and that feels really niche. And like, oh, how big could this be? And I think they're doing like 600 million a year in sales on their platform of music equipment, and they're extraordinary. And it shows because the people who work there and who founded it love the category, and they treat their sellers well. They treat their buyers well. Like, they understand what you feel and how you feel about the guitar, and that emotional connection. Even if you don't have massive product improvements, it leads to a much higher net promoter score and user experience because you're talking to people who care and are trying to make a better job.
And there's a nuance of understanding that world, right? Like,
absolutely,
that's a big factor. So what I'd love to think about together is, you are investing in 100+ startups like this a year, and is that right? 100 plus a year, and you have 100 a week coming to see you. So you maybe only invest in one a week or 1.5.
2 a week,
2 a week. So what's interesting to me is you probably must see most marketplace companies that are coming about, and the reason I printed out the Craigslist homepage and the slides you put there was just to say, if I was an entrepreneur listening to this and I say, look, I'm really inspired by this conversation, I want to go build a marketplace business, and maybe I'll come and be a part of FJ Labs. How would you go about thinking about a vertical that is untapped, and how would you do the due diligence to work out the potential opportunity?
So first, what are the trends in marketplaces? And there are 3 trends. And the verticalization of the horizontals is one of them.
Okay.
And you need to think the horizontals are not just Craigslist and eBay, but like Upwork is a horizontal, and you can go and create a vertical for only software developers or only transcribers, etc. Thumbtack is a horizontal across all the categories for home improvement, and you can do verticals of that. And you find the opportunity to create a lot of these verticals. I mean, think of Twitch. Twitch is a vertical of YouTube in a way. And so that is happening, frankly, in every general category. Second big trend, and it's just as important trend, if not more important, is the old model is the buyer or the seller puts an ad, and a lot of people interact with them, and ultimately they agree to a price, and ultimately they agree to transaction. And that's true if you want to hire a plumber, and you interact with 30 of them, and then or 40 of them, and then you come up with a price, and the deal gets done, and typically they overcharge you and they don't deliver well.
It's no transparency.
The new model is the marketplace pick model. The marketplace picks your supplier. You just say what you need. The marketplace picks the person that does it for you. And so Uber, you don't pick your driver. And in the early days of this new model, people thought this could only be done for commoditized products and services. But this is actually turning out not to be true. Now we have a company in France called Comet a company would say, I need a back-end developer. And the old model would have been, here's 300 of them, go and interview them and pick one. They say, no, based on your specs and who you are and the way your company works, this is the person for you.
Yeah.
And so that model is really improving the user experience for both sides. The utilization of the fill rates go up, the economics go up. I mean, there was a company called RigUp, for instance. It's a oil services contractor marketplace. And so it helps you find if you need a welder for your old platform in the North Sea, they'll help you find them. I mean, so this new model, the marketplace-like model, is the other one. And the third big trend is B2B marketplaces, because in all the other categories like petrochemicals, airline parts, scrap metal, most of these things are still done by like pen and paper and Rolodex and email and Excel. Like nothing has gone online and become transparent. So when I think about these things, if I'm building a marketplace, I'm like, okay, what are the trends in marketplace overall? Which of these are interesting? And the way I think which of these are interesting is like, hey, what meets the trend? Then which one is going to have interesting economics? And for me, good economics is, can I recoup my fully loaded customer acquisition costs after 6 months? Can I 3x that after 18 months, and ultimately can it be 10x or more?
Yeah.
And you can actually test it, right? If you come up with an idea, and to see if the idea is good, first I check like what is the current total addressable market size? How can I make the market bigger if it's not all that big to begin with? What are the business models that are valid? And I can talk about how you design which model business model to pick. And then you go test it. You test what a customer acquisition would look like by putting landing pages, spending a couple $100 on Google, Facebook.
Yeah.
So
that's before you even have a product. You're just basically putting a landing page and seeing how much people click, and then there's like an email form or something, I assume.
Yeah, email form, and then you make an assumption of what percentage of those would buy, and then in the category on average where the order values are and where the margins are, and then you see if it kind of makes sense. And you also look at the density, the depth of your acquisition channels. How much could you really spend and make it work?
Okay.
Because I care about unit economics working. So so today I would probably build a vertical transactional marketplace where the marketplace picks your supplier. You start by typically curating the supply. So you go after the supply first because they're financially motivated to be in the platform.
Yeah.
You get the highest quality ever of that supply. You start sending them demand to try to be 30-40% of the revenues. And then you scale in parallel your supply and your demand in that vertical, providing a better user experience for all. And then you scale either in other cities or in other states, et cetera. Testing the unit economics along the way. Now, in terms of what your pricing model is, there are 4 typical models. You can charge a listing fee. That's really the old model. You can put some ads or a bump up, a pretty old model as well. You can have a SaaS fee, especially if you're in B2B. The one I like best actually is just taking percentage. And you have to think through, do I take the percentage of the buyer or the seller? And the percentages go all over the place. They can go from 1% to 75%.
Yeah.
And that's driven by how fragmented both sides are and which side is more inelastic. And so you want to take your percentage on the more inelastic part of the supply or demand curve. And you can actually test the elasticity by creating a lot of landing pages with a lot of different price points and seeing what people are up for. And you can understand how much you should take. And it really varies. I mean, Uber takes 25% from the drivers.
Yeah.
Airbnb takes 10% from the travelers. So from the buyers, right? Yeah. So who pays? And 3%, but that's to cover billing costs from the inside. But it really, really varies. And I mean, stock photography marketplaces take 75% from the photographers because everyone can just take photos and they don't necessarily value them all that much. And so
this is referred to as a rake, is that right?
It's called a rake or take rate or a percentage that they take on each transaction. On average, most people set up but the average would be you take 10 to 20% of the transaction from the seller, but that's the average, and it really varies on whatever vertical you're going after.
Cool.
And the other thing I would think about is like, what are very large categories where the user experience is broken, and that we can use a marketplace to improve the user experience, improve the NPS, and ideally improve the economics for everyone. And there are so many of those, right?
Yeah.
I hate my banking experience. I hate my credit card experience. I hate my insurance experience. I hate. Or you can take these categories that haven't been done yet, and there's so many of them, and you can do a better job.
And just to clarify for people listening, NPS is Net Promoter Score, right?
Correct.
So that means if how essentially in plain English is how much you would tell your friend
Yeah, it's a reflection of how good the experience is in general.
Yeah.
Like, is the
experience.
company and the experience doing a good job at delivering the products and services that they're supposed to be doing? And the reality, especially when it comes to the old offline companies, most of the experience is not particularly good. And frankly, even some of the old online companies, the experience is pretty bad, and you can think of better ways to improve upon that.
So I've heard you talk about, or you've written about in your presentation, and you mentioned some of them there. Just for people listening, when you're looking at a potential marketplace opportunity, there are ideal conditions, and you mentioned some of them there, which is like fragmented supply and demand, bad discovery, there's a lack of trust or a lack of communication, price transparency. Those are all different areas that you can say, so-and-so is not, like I think real estate is a really interesting one in New York. I mean, there are a few people working on this already, but just if you've ever rented an apartment in New York, it's super frustrating. Like you go and see a bunch of places, it doesn't feel like most of the brokers you work with have any incentive to be nice to you, let alone even do anything that's value added. And it just feels to me forever that's been a huge issue. But so I think there's many
Absolutely. I mean,
of
property tech is massively being disrupted right now. I mean, we have a company like Open Door, which is basically saying, look, the way real estate transactions have been happening make absolutely no sense. You hire a broker, from the day you hire them to the day you get an offer you accept, it takes like 90 days on average.
But this is for purchasing, right?
If you're selling.
If you're selling, sorry.
If you're selling, yeah. I'm giving one example, but like this is one of many examples in that value chain that is being disrupted. You need to keep your apartment clean. You need to make showings. It's not as though that real estate broker actually has buyers on hand. They just get them from like the MLS and the online real estate sites. Then from the day you accept the offer to the day you get the money, so another like 60 days. So it's like 150 days with uncertainty on closing, pricing. You need to keep the apartment clean, and frankly, they don't do all that much, and they're taking 6%. And so what Open Door is convincing a lot of people to do is say, look, we are going to buy your house at full fair market price.
Yeah.
If it's worth $100,000, we'll buy it for $100,000. We'll resell it for $100,000. We're not really going to make a margin on it, but we will take for us the 6% commission, except you get the cash up front.
Yeah.
That value proposition is so extraordinary. They've become the largest real estate broker in all the cities they've launched. They're profitable in a number of cities. I mean, they've done like several billion in transactions last year. And this is one of many examples of what's happening in prop tech. But in prop tech, you have like companies like Sonder, Domio, Roofstock, Compass that are all attacking it and realizing the same thing. The user experience is broken. We can do a better job with at least the same economics, if not better economics for everyone.
So if we were looking at 2019 and beyond, and you probably have verticals that you are looking at attacking yourself, and you incubate 1 or 2 companies every year as well. So if we were looking at, let's say, these categories on Craigslist or just other ones that you know of, are there a few that really stand out to you? We just talked about a couple there, but are there a few that really stand out to you that just seem so obvious that still haven't been really improved too much?
They don't actually need to be improved by marketplaces, but when I look at my life experiences, there are many things which are horrible. Like recently, I brought a friend to an emergency room, and he was like half passed out. They like spent 2 hours making me film paperwork, and like took him 7 hours to see a doctor as he was like really delirious and out of it. Like that makes no sense. The entire healthcare system is completely broken. Many of the traditional banking relationships are broken, and we're seeing a lot of innovation there. One example, and to show the contrast between the new way of thinking and the old way of thinking, but this can be applied to other verticals and other categories. We're investors in a company called Clearbank, and what Clearbank does is small business lending. They go in, if you're a small store owner on Shopify, they'll go in your Google AdWords analytics and your Shopify account, and they'll look at the profitability of your marketing. And if it's profitable, they'll lend you to spend more.
Yeah.
I guarantee you Citibank and JP Morgan or whatever, Bank of America, will never do this.
Yeah.
Right? And so they're being completely removed out of the value chain because they don't have the sophistication to do these modern types of businesses. And I'm seeing opportunities like that, frankly, in many, many verticals. The ones that are completely untapped, by the way, probably more on the B2B side, where most of the transactions as I said, are still happening on Rolodex, and there's no online stores. Now, the issue is to attack these B2B marketplaces, it helps to come from the industry because you need to create a behavior change. But it's starting to happen, and we're now like in dump truck marketplaces. That's a $37 billion a year market, but we don't think about it because we're not in that world. So no, lots of opportunities.
Very interesting. Another thing I've heard you talk about is the next stage once you've proven product market fit and you've I forgot the term you mentioned, but
nail it before you scale it.
Nail it before you scale it, right? So you've worked out your unit economics, how much it's going to cost to acquire customers and scale up, generally speaking. Then you really need to go for this growth mode. And that's something you've been a specialist in as well with the companies you've worked on. And I come from a marketing background. I worked on digital marketing, I still do. And I've heard you talk about TV. And that was not super surprising, especially considering that it's consumer facing a lot of the time. But I've heard you talk about how you feel like TV is still untapped for these sort of marketplaces.
It can be untapped.
Okay.
We are unit economic driven, and so we use the same attribute. We use very sophisticated attribution models to know where the consumers are coming from, how much it costs us to acquire them through each channel, and then compare that to the long-term value of those customers and make sure that it makes sense. It just so happens that, especially in the U.S., because Google and Facebook have become so expensive on a relative basis, TV done right, and there's the very important wrinkle, done right, can actually be a very effective cost acquisition channel. The issue is it doesn't work for every company and every idea. It needs to be a reasonably mass market idea that is prototypically consumer facing. And you need to have enough funding for it. So it's not something you would typically be doing at the Series A or seed. It's something at the earliest you will be doing at the Series B. But many of our portfolio companies, from Adore.me to Rebag to Letgo, have actually successfully used TV to get where they are today. But I wouldn't necessarily recommend it for everyone, but it is a valid channel. Again, if you do it right and you make sure that your unit economics are profitable with the channel.
Great, man. Well, I think we've done a good deep dive on marketplaces, and hopefully if you listen to this, that was useful for you. Just to close out, I did want to really just get behind the mind a little bit. And, I've read a bunch of your blog posts, and one of the things that really stood out looking at your background is you've made a decision, let's say. It doesn't mean you're always right, but when to stop something and when to keep going, right? So when you were sleeping on the couch and eating ramen noodles for 2 years, you could have easily said, this doesn't look like it's working out, I'm going to give up. But you didn't, you kept going in that instance. At the same time, recently you had a project in the Dominican Republic, and I think you had a strategic game or something like that you called it on, and you said, actually, that was great for a few years, and for these reasons, I'm no longer going to keep going. So I'd love to understand how you think about, when do you know when to keep going versus to retreat?
The proper thing of the entrepreneur is to throw a lot of spaghetti on the wall, and it just so happens that a lot of it doesn't stick. And it's good to create, I don't know if I want to call them necessarily OKRs, but like checking points of like, are you making objectively real progress? And so create the metrics to measure whether that progress is happening, and then objectively check yourself. Because the problem I had both with the game and the Dominican Republic project is I was emotionally invested in it, and it felt like we were making progress. But if I'd been more objective, I think I would have pulled the plug a lot earlier and wasted a lot less time and money. Now others, it's easier. Like one of the things I considered doing after I sold OLX and having downgraded was like I considered becoming a public intellectual, and so I went through the process of what does it take to do that. So I talked to like the Neil Ferguson's or Paul Krugman's of the world, and like, how do you transition from being just in academia to being in this position? And they were like, oh, you need to write OPET papers or of like 800 words and submit them to the Washington Post and New York Times, and you need to create a brand by being specific in this in an issue. And I started doing it, and I'm like, oh, I actually don't like doing that. I prefer the free form of being able to write in whatever length I want and whatever topic I want on my blog than doing that. And so I decided, it wasn't for me after all. So that was easy to give up. And then there are a lot of things I tried But because they required other people's approval, they were low probability outcomes to begin with. I tried to convince Craig and Jim to let me run Craigslist or buy Craigslist from them, and they said no. I tried to buy eBay Classifieds back in 2015, and they changed their mind and said, "I sell it." I tried to actually run parts of Cuba by creating special economic zone in Cuba in like 2013, 2014. They ultimately said no as well. So in a way, like those end on their own because people, there is a ultimate decision by someone else say, okay, no. And now the harder things are the things that you try that are not necessarily working well or working, but it's hard to tell how well they're working, whether or not you continue. And there's a fine line between grit and tenacity, which you want every entrepreneur to have, and stubbornness to the point that it's not productive. And so that's why I think having these objective metrics that you can look at to see, am I making real progress towards to something that seems sustainable and meaningful, or is it like really delusional? Makes a lot of sense. And in Zingy, while I was like on the couch, etc., little by little we were signing music publishers. Little by little we were signing artists. Little by little we were signing music labels. Little by little, we had first we did a deal with MSN where we were selling on their website. Then we did a deal with Motorola to sell on their website for Nextel phones. Yeah. Then that led to the Sprint contract, and I could see the flywheel starting to get going, and it looked like we were really making progress, and so I kept going, and frankly at this point I also had really nothing to lose. I'm like, why not? In the case of the La Boca project in the Dominican Republic, where I was trying to build like a 200-acre playground where I was going to create huge co-working spaces to invite entrepreneurs to come and build companies, and it was also going to be a wonderful house where my friends and family can come and hang out, etc. Yeah. There is, the problem is do we have what it takes to launch? And it felt on paper like legally yes, but we had so many setbacks along the way, and so many things were going sideways or costing more and more time and money, which was never meant to do. And because it was never meant to be a real project, it's not meant to be financially viable. When it started taking too much time and money, I should have pulled the plug, because that was never the intent. And same thing with the game. The game is oh, I love real-time strategy games. Maybe I should build the one that I want to do. But when it became pretty evident that with $1 million or $2 million, we're not going to get the quality of game I would have expected to have, that I thought would be commercially viable and interesting, it would take a lot more time and money. I should have pulled the plug. Yeah. But because of the time, it's like the sunk cost fallacy, the time already spent on it and the emotional attachment, you keep doing it for longer than I should have.
Do you feel like that, if you don't mind me asking, have you felt like that? We've talked a lot about the business and your work life, but in your own personal life, in relationships, that sort of stuff, have you felt like that too? Because that's a common thing. People in a relationship for many years and they feel like it's not working out, but they keep going because they're like, I've already invested this amount of time. Have you felt like you've had a way to get around that, or at least have the awareness to know this isn't the right thing versus it is?
Well, I use the same process, right? So these emails I write myself to make these fundamental decisions. I write to them myself, whether I have a malaise or, frankly, every 2 years to check in. And I do it professionally and personally. Should I remain in the relationship that I'm in? Should I move to the next level? Should I off the train? But I preach, both in my professional and personal life, something called radical honesty and transparency on everything. And so I tell entrepreneurs who pitch me why, if I don't invest, why I'm not investing and what I would need to change. And I mostly tell people no, given that it's like a 99% rejection rate. But I do the same thing in my personal life. And if something doesn't feel right, I express it, or even in little issues, like if this didn't make me feel comfortable, or I'm not feeling great mood, or whatever, and having that, I think, makes it easier. And so I think I've been pretty. I mean, sadly, it also hurt. It's not, you do it. Obviously, it's not, because it's never the other person's fault. It's maybe you're not feeling in love for whatever reason. even though on paper you may be perfect.
Yeah.
And it's not that like that person's not great. They are legitimately great, and frankly, I would be lucky to be with them. But ultimately, if it doesn't feel right, I tell them and I move on. So I've actually been pretty good at ripping the Band-Aid, even though it hurts, and it happens in both directions. Sometimes I feel something is great and the other person doesn't, and so you can be both the recipient and or the giver of unrequited love, and it really, really hurts. I think it's harder when you're the giver of unrequited love than the receiver, but it's very uncomfortable to be the receiver of it when you don't feel it back.
Yeah, for sure, man. That's great. The last thing I will ask, just to wrap things up, and I feel like you've answered this in some seeds through this conversation, but I always like to kind of finish off just to ask, what is making you most happy right now? It sounds like you've got this great balance of work and travel and having this intellectual stimulation with your friends and those sorts of things. But, if you could really pinpoint what is making you happy, that is ultimately what we're all seeking, right? Like, we want success in our own ways. But really, I think most people are looking for happiness, whatever that means to them. So I'm just curious, like, what does that actually mean to you?
Yeah, I'm not sure that pursuit of happiness is you should just be happy, right? Like, so if you're chasing at a treadmill after something, I'm not sure you ever actually get there. Be happy in your present. So I'm really happy because I love what I do. I love what I do professionally. I love what I do personally.
Yeah.
I like that setup that I've kind of iterated on to get to. I mean, the last huge blog post I wrote on how I make decisions is after late 2012, when I left OLX and gave everything away to charity, I tried a lot of things.
Yeah.
Most of these things actually failed or didn't work out, or and what was left was the life balance setup that I have today that really works well for me. And so I'm happy in the present with my friends and family and relationships and the activities that I do, and frankly, the opportunities that I have. Like, I'm privileged and blessed to be in a position to look at new crazy opportunities, and I get these crazy ideas once every other year or so that I can go pursue. And again, most of them will fail, and it'll be fun. And I get to read all these books and meet all these interesting people and go on podcasts like these that are fun. And life, frankly, is really great, and I'm very privileged to be living this life. I'm very, very grateful for that. I'm very aware of that, and so be present, be happy.
Yeah. Has there ever been a time you haven't felt like that?
Not really, because I was thinking even back, like when I was like post the bubble bursting, pre-Zingy, like where it felt like I left the biggest opportunity of my life on passed me by, where I'd been in the right time, the right place, the right skills, and I'd not made the most of it. And I was like, it's the life is still pretty great. I mean, like, I'm still living in like the most amazing time ever to be alive, right? Like we are in the most prosperous period in the history of humanity. We're in the most peaceful period in the history of humanity, and I have opportunities available to me that like were unthinkable and unfathomable to like the emperors of yesteryear, and that is mind-boggling to me. I mean, like the fact that I can go from one side of the world to the next in like the same day, that I can communicate with people in the rest of the world, and that all this knowledge is available to consume, to learn, and I can be part of making this world better. I mean, it's like, it's so gratifying and so rare. Like, this was not true for most of humanity. Most of humanity, we were surviving, and now we can actually be thriving, and we can be thinking of like how we design this to be better. Yeah,
man, that's a great way to finish off. I love that. Thanks so much for coming on the show, man. This has been awesome. And where can people learn more about your stuff you write on your blog?
Yeah, it's just my name, FabriceGrinda.com.
It's Grinda.
Correct.
And is there any social, like, is it at Fabrice Grinda as well?
It's at Fabrice Grinda. I don't really tweet much other than post my links to the blog post. Same thing with my Facebook, which is, I think, also /Fabrice Grinda, or my Instagram, which is at Fabrice Grinda. I'm not super active on any of these. They're more like distribution channels for general content.
Great, man. Well, thanks again. And, if you're listening to this on audio, you can go on youtube.com/CreatorLabFM to see this visually. And on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, etc., we're sharing these great little 1-minute snippets from these videos as well, which I'll share with you. And again, thank you to Listening Party and Canal Street Market for hosting us today. And have yourself a wonderful day, wherever you're doing. Cheers.